might it be appropriate to say that I have a regret? You know, is a regret in the present, or is it only to do with the past? Regret is that we are not physically in the same space, because there's a somewhat different kind of an energy and a vibration, and there is something that's exchanged. And I'm not denying that it can also happen at a distance, you know, beyond whatever the distance might be between us. But there's something very beautiful about being in the same space with other people. And even though one may be doing more of the talking, yet there is something that's being communicated from everyone else as well that informs whatever it is that the talker's saying. And so my regret is that I'm not with you, but we'll very quickly get over that one. And you know, when I think of this topic, live life fully with no regrets, what it sounds like a key phrase that would probably appear in every commencement address, you know, when it's time for the graduates to receive their degree, and there's always someone who gives the address. That probably would be a line that would be shared over and over again. Live your life fully, no regrets. And I wonder if that dictum might be wasted or not so pertinent to people at that stage in their life, because they're still very young, and of course they've just graduated. Their achievements are no doubt praiseworthy, and they're ready to go on with their lives, to do something. And yet at the same time, you know, at that age, I think young people, it's not a question of education or not, but they're very self-absorbed. And there's also, they don't even have much of a past. And often I think of regrets as being something in our past. And so what regrets do you have when you're that age, you know, or that you would even dwell on them? They may be momentary. So the quality sometimes of young people, despite the self-absorption, is that there's also an innocence. And it's rare to see innocence without confidence. They're innocent of what's to happen in their life. They're innocent of many things. They're still in the process of maturing, of growing into themselves, knowing themselves. And so there's a confidence. So I doubt if I'm speaking to people in that category, even though I may use, or we may use that title, that dictum for everyone. But mostly, I think it is as we go on in life that there may have been mistakes, things done, things happen to us, and for which there may be the experience of regret. Now, the implication here, and what has become the common expression, is don't have any regrets. The inference that regret is not a useful thing, that it's pointless. And I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure, because in there being regret, then it means that you are maybe thinking about things, that you are mulling over something. You are telling yourself that you could have done something better. You might have said something different, could have behaved in another way, which is fine if that's as far as it goes. And on that basis that you determine, and as far as you can, to make changes or to do better the next time. But regret carried for a long time, again, like we were saying earlier on, it can become something much bigger and not at all useful. And what we sometimes see is, and it's a little sad, is that maybe one thing happened in one's life, and years later, on reflecting, because regret does suggest some kind of reflection. And so it can be a reflection that turns into blame, that turns into sadness, maybe even into cynicism. Then that is not healthy. And it becomes yes, the imagination gets involved, but say for instance, where, as I say, something happened early on in your life, and here we are now reflecting over our life, and where I stand, I'm not very happy. I'm not very satisfied. I'm depressed. I feel lonely. Many of these negative type of feelings or emotions, but I'm placing the blame for all of it on that one thing that happened, whether in my childhood or at some other point in my life. And, it's like going from way back there, coming right into the present. And, it's like a trick. I'm tricking myself that, that everything can be put down to that incident or whatever. And so this thing of living your life fully, and I sometimes think, and I'm going back again to the young people, and if you remember as a child, then what were the questions that all the grown-ups asked you at some point? They all asked you, what are you going to be? What are you going to be? The implication that when you would grow up, you would be that thing, end of story. And I think maybe a better question is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do, rather than what are you going to be? Because the being that's being suggested usually is as a result of study, of schooling, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a teacher, whatever it is. And then how many times did we maybe become, not because we really had an inclination towards it, but that that maybe our parents were living vicariously through us. They wanted us to be this thing, whatever it is, fill in the blank. And I'm aware of how much the world has changed since I was a kid, and even I when I was middle-aged, it has changed so much even since then. And I'm not surprised that many times when you ask young people today, I don't know whether they'll tell it to your face or whether it will only be in terms of social media, but you ask them what they want to be and they say famous. They want to be famous. And I think that, you know, every soul, in every soul, there is a knowing that we're not always able to access. And this idea of reflection, if you go back to your childhood, you know, I was thinking about this in relation to the talk. And I remember as a kid, and, you know, we're talking like the late 50s, the early 60s. And something in me, I don't even know that it was ever spoken out loud, but it was to do with travel. That, and I'm not even sure I would have used the phrase, I want to see the world. I don't even think it would have come like that, but it was something that percolated in the soul. And of course, when I would think about travel, I mean, from where I sat, neither having the financial wherewithal or anything else, I possibly hadn't even been to the main city, which closest to me, which was Belfast. I don't even think I had been that far. I was about 16 before I even went to Belfast. And yet this thought of travel. And then in thinking about it, what was the best I could come up with? Because you would equate it then with maybe a job. And so the only job that would have been on my radar at that time would have been what back in the day was called an air hostess, right? The idea of being a pilot didn't even go across my brain, because quite possibly there was no indication that this is something that women could participate in, that there were female commercial airline pilots, not that I knew of. And so the soul knew something, but then the translation could only be according to the circumstances in which I found myself. And the other thing that then when people would say, what do you want to be? I would sometimes say a teacher. And yet I did not only did I not have, but I had no interest in acquiring the academic qualifications necessary for that, you know. But in both instances, these two things have happened in their own unique way in my life. I didn't become the air hostess, I didn't become the pilot, and I didn't become a school teacher. And yet I have, even before coming to the Brahma Kumaris, traveled extensively. And I suppose in the context of my spiritual life would be seen as a teacher, even though I would first and foremostly see myself as a student, in that study would not have been my natural inclination, but a deep inclination is always to learn. And I think that is one of the things that is going to help in living a life fully, is the attitude of learning. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking we're right. And you may be right in that moment, you know, but by insisting on being right, you may be blocking something else. And so this combination of asking the questions and There's the thing of the right questions and of a curiosity and a willingness to learn. I think that it opens something in your soul. And I do sense, my experience informs me that there is some kind of a plan in the soul of each one. Now, don't ask me as to who put it there or whatever. That's beyond the remit of today's talk. But that there is a plan, and it keeps giving you hints, even though you get distracted and we take the proverbial wrong road, or we think we can manage a shortcut. But there is no shortcuts at one level, because if you don't cover the ground that you're supposed to cover, and you think that you've gotten ahead of yourself or somebody else, then something will happen to kind of gently push you back again, not to punish you, but saying you need this qualification. You need this qualification. And so the universe, always kindly disposed towards us, will ensure that it will provide the people, the situations, and everything for my learning. But what I sometimes feel too is that, you know, your timing and the universe's timing may not be the same, that the universe knows you need some other qualification. And I'm not talking here about the qualification that you know, your master's or your doctorate or something else. It's about life's learning. And what it comes back to in many ways are these things. When we think about regrets, you know, what are your regrets for? There are different kinds of regrets. Yes, when people say this, that my life has been this and I have no regrets, I think what they're talking about is the big picture stuff, which is good and as it should be. But often in our life, it's the small things that we have regrets over, you know, that I behaved badly, that I said the wrong thing, that there wasn't kindness, or that there was a lack of generosity in my expression or in my attitude, or that I acted out of a bias, you know, at best, you know, could be worse than that. But and so, as mentioned to Artie a little while earlier, that it's like a buzzer goes off, and it's reminding and reinforcing, so that the regret is not continued, and that, you know, I can do something about it. I see, like, a couple of things, you know, anecdotal, but I remember a lady telling me about how much she regretted marrying the man she married. And so then I asked her, but what about the children you had with them? Do you regret that? And of course, she didn't regret that. But in order for her to have had those children, she had to have been with their father, you know. Or it's like they say sometimes that you date or you fall in love with the illusion. You marry the truth. and you divorce the mistake. Or as one of our dear yogis, Daddy Janki, whom I'm sure some of you know, she used to say that you sometimes get impressed by someone's personality, even their virtues, and then you develop a relationship, and then you discover in that their character, which is very different. And then, so it's like how these things like that come from our own illusory thinking, how things are, because we want them to be a certain way. And so we project onto other people what we want them to be to us or for us. And then when, you know, we see the flaws or whatever, do we blame ourselves? Mostly we blame them. So that's another part of regret that turns into blame. And, you know, where again, regret, it can be used to literally torture yourself. You can torture yourself with your regret, and or where it turns into shame. And I think sometimes that this too can be a perversion, that it's a perverted way. If I'm feeling bad and I'm feeling ashamed and I'm feeling all of those things, it can almost be a perverted way of my telling myself that if I can feel that, it proves that I'm really a good person. If I can feel bad, it proves that I'm a good person. And it's not a very great way of arriving at your own goodness by feeling bad about something. And so this thing of like, you know, what is your life for? It has a purpose. It has a very definite purpose. And sometimes just by a right attitude, or choosing virtues, choosing even happiness, then there's more likelihood that it will be revealed to you, you know, what your life is providing, what it can provide for your own well-being, and maybe even by extension to others. You know, am I living my life for others? There's no question my life will affect others, but it's not that I'm manipulating myself or just so that everybody else can be pleased with me. I don't think it's about that. And so, you know, even going back again to childhood things, and you know, that our parents could only teach us as much as they themselves knew. And so they did their best maybe in providing the basic requirements, but they didn't know who we necessarily were or what we could be. And maybe they weren't encouraging, maybe they didn't contribute much to your self-confidence, or maybe in some ways because of their non-involvement, you actually had more self-confidence because you were totally relying on your own self. And so seeing too how, you know, what is life? What does it mean for you? You have to ask yourself. You know, you can have someone, I've seen, for instance, where some people have the inclination and also perhaps even the wherewithal to be number one in a chosen field. And they, by dint of maybe practice or hard work or whatever, they get there. And by so doing, whatever it is you're doing, I think you sometimes have to ask yourself, can you afford it? And for people that I have seen in that situation, it's like, can you now afford the competition that you're going to be confronted with? Can you afford the time and energy and everything it's going to take to remain at number one? And can you afford the possibility of jealousy from other people? And so that's definitely not my life, where I think sometimes that a kind of a laziness is not a bad thing, because in other words, you do what you can, but there's also a trust in that it's not all on you. There's a trust in maybe just what we refer to as the drama, the unfolding story of humanity, and that everything, will be all right. And so that you don't find yourself being incapacitated by regret, and that there's a certain liberation that, and maybe this is what we all want at some level, is to be free, and not least freedom in expressing ourselves. And I feel in some ways in the world today, I see people wrestle with things that, or many, many more people wrestle with things that I didn't see them wrestle with back in the day. Doesn't mean that they weren't doing it quietly or behind doors or whatever. But now we see, in terms of people asking the question, like, who am I, in terms of their gender, in terms of their sexuality, and many of these things. And where there's also more openness, I think, depending on what part of the world you're in, perhaps, in embracing that, so this old adage of live and let live, that I can never, fault someone for trying to discover, even though the methodology they use may not be the same as mine, but the attempt is the same, to answer the question, who am I? And then the idea of like the liberation, where there's a certain freedom to be your own self, and whether it requires you to be in company with a certain kind of people, but ultimately, and just like, again, when you're a child and you have a happy home life, there's security, you intuitively know that you're loved and that everything is there for your growth, then you can leave that home and go confidently out into the world, and knowing that you can go back again, that you will be received in whatever condition you go back in. And so now it's a little bit more of where you're having to find that security within your own self, to find home within your own self, and that clarity about who I am. And it's to do with discovery, and it's not any longer limited to your nationality, because now people have 2 or 3 nationalities, if not more. And it's like, where do you sit? In fact, you can sit comfortably in all of them, but it's this thing of discovering what's in your own soul, and that there's something that's going on through life's experience being handled properly, that you can negate many things, that you can put things in the right context, that you can give them the appropriate value. And it's like, again, it's now in vogue to sort of clean out your house, get rid of all your old stuff so that there's nothing extraneous, and that you're not living your life for just someone else, and because society says this is how it has to be done. And once again, I'm not saying that there aren't basic human rules or dictates that do and have to be followed, because generally when it comes to social order or whatever, the essential thought is for the benefit and the health and the well-being of all. But most of us maybe see ourselves as not just the herd, but you have to acknowledge the individuality of you and of your life. Something I heard yesterday that I like very much, that you know, sit down, and this is what we would be doing in meditation. Sit down and allow your soul to catch up with you and all your lists of what you have to do and what you should do and where you should be and so on. And to, you know, let your soul catch up so that it can inform you and draw you back into its orbit, which is really yours. And to then that will help you consolidate everything else. And so even then, none of us are infallible, and we're going to make mistakes. You know, it's not intentional, because again, it's not just you. You're not in control. Yes, at best we say you are in control of your own vibration level, but you're not in control. You're not your parents, you're not your boss, you're not all these other people who have an influence or an input, or your children in your life. And that's why it is so very important to make that time, you know, for meditation and for contemplation, so that you can see yourself free of all of these other strings that sometimes bind you, and that you can also be a little bit like, you know, again, going back to the child, their innocence, their confidence, and their ability to be totally in the present, you know, that they're not worried about the future or thinking about it, and they're not old enough to look back and have regrets about the past. And so I was just speaking to someone, or they were sharing a story yesterday of how someone who had, it was a family situation, and the brother had cajoled them out of what was essentially their inheritance. They trusted the brother to manage the funds and the properties and everything else, but he cheated hugely. And for a long time, the sister didn't even, you know, accept that this was happening. And then I suppose momentarily the regret that she had given him the power to manage all of these things. But ultimately, after probably maybe even some court cases or whatever, and her coming back to a place where of forgiveness and everything else, and what she said was simply that if all these things would not have happened, then she would be a very different person today. And so she took it in the most positive of ways, that it made her question It made her stand up for herself. It made her courageous in being able to challenge, which she hadn't been able to do before. And it brought her to a place of spiritual awareness or maturity because of the hurt and the harm that had been done to her. And so this is the thing. I think everybody has to get there, whatever there is, eventually. That we're all at different places on, on the journey, but essentially it's the same. The lessons will come in different forms through different people. Might take shorter or longer for each one, but it's about finding our way home. It's finding our way to that place of comfort. Now, not the comfort that has you sitting in a corner and not confronting anything or challenging anything or experimenting with things, but that you always have to manage, your conscience. And so that there can be that contentment, but you haven't compromised your conscience. And, the people I think who are, do people love you because you're always doing what they want you to do, or do they love you because you're authentic, warts and all, and so what is the mirror that you're giving other people to be able to see themselves? And so somebody was saying too about how sometimes in our lives, that we can be the watcher of our own self. What's the name of that meditation? Mindfulness, that you can be too mindful and that you can watch too carefully, almost overwatch something to the point where you're always seeing the possibility of a fall or an accident or being cheated or not done right by. And that then too, the other side of that is, is looking at other people and seeing them as spiritual beings, and they're unique. There's, that kind of there can be a wildness in each one's soul that's joyful, however it expresses itself. And that even if they've been in that dark, suspicious place, that by your seeing them in terms of their potential or their possibility, that you can touch that in them so that they can claim it for themselves. And so in that way, we kind of befriend each other, and with no strings attached. So these are just some of the things that I was thinking about. So time is speeding up, and at the end of the day, we're all looking for the same thing, which is some semblance of well-being, peace with whatever our situation and circumstances may be, continued growth, a deepening sense, hopefully, of connection, and that you have a right to be here. And in fact, there's even a need for you to be here, and that you have gifts to contribute, no matter how mundane your life might look to anybody else. But for you, it's not. If there's an inner life, it's not a mundane life. It's not a domesticated life. You know, it's a very exciting life. So this is, I think, is it okay? Do we leave it there? And I think we're supposed to do a little meditation now. I'm the child. I'm new. Not so long removed from the source, such that there's still that security, stability, and feeling of belonging. And with that, I'm ready to explore. Explore the soul that is of me. And not just the top layer, but rather diving deep. Yes, like an ocean. And finding gifts and colors and all manner of aliveness that appeal not to the senses, but to that eternal part of me. And a blossoming happens. There's a fullness and no hesitation in accepting what the source is showing me and even offering me. And the whisper is, you are a creature of peace. You are a being of love. Light is your form. And happiness your nature. I luxuriate in this feeling of liberation and remain open to whatever is to come. Om Shanti.